Hi everyone, I hope you can hear me and see me, and welcome to our Open Day. It's our Southeast GLH and Synovis Open Day for 2024. We had one last year as well online, so this year it'll be a similar content with a few updates. Just to introduce myself, I'm Nick Hickson. I'm the Education and Training Lead for the Southeast Genomic Laboratory Hubs. And we've also got Leila Afhami and Julia Baptista, who are two of our scientific training officers, practice educators within the GLH as well, and will be co-hosting the session today. Any questions, you should be able to post them in the chat. And the questions, you can pick myself, Leila, Julia, or one of our speakers to address it to, and we'll try and monitor those to provide any answers during the designated Q&A, so question and answer sessions. So firstly, we're going to start with this is the overview of the day, and then we're going to talk to you a bit about the genomic staff structure that we've got in our GLH. We're going to move on to, we've got a guest, a patient representative who's going to tell us a bit about they're going to tell us a bit about their own experience. So thank you very much for taking the time to do that. And then we're going to have a brief video with a genomics laboratory tour, and then we'll go into meeting staff of ours and who will give you an idea of what it is like to be in those job roles as genetic technologists, clinical scientists, and then moving on to more managerial posts as well. And we'll have the Q&A after that. We'll have a 10-minute break. That's at 2:50. Come back at 3 o'clock and we'll focus a lot more on the careers that you can have with us in genomics. We'll have our the people from our apprenticeships and scientific development team at Synovis who will talk about the apprenticeships and also the options for bank staff with Synovis and job opportunities. And then we're also going to concentrate on the pre-registration scientist training and the equivalence routes that are available. And we'll also talk to some of our actual pre-registration scientists and have another Q&A session, followed by a 10-minute break. The third section will focus heavily on the scientist training program, which a lot of you may be attending and have that as your priority. So we'll give you an overview of the training program, the application process, some tips from some of our current STPs as well, and then another Q&A session. And finally, we'll just wrap up the day and finish by 5 o'clock. I just want to introduce the Southeast Genomic Laboratory Hub at this point. So there are 7 regional genomic laboratory hubs in England. And the aim is to transform the genomic testing within the NHS since they first launched. The main responsibilities of each of these hubs is to provide access to a full repertoire of genomic tests, which are defined by the National Genomics Test Directory, which is almost like a menu that clinicians can use to order specific genetic tests for their patients via the genomic laboratory hubs. So the second responsibility that we have is to standardize the provision of the services covered by this test directory and ensure there's equitable access across the country. So whether you live in the south or in the north, you have the same access to the same services. And that is where we are located within the southeast. So we offer genomic testing for about 29 NHS trusts within the southeast, and that equates to approximately 8 million people, which is about 15% of the English population. The main trusts involved within the Southeast Genomic Laboratory Hubs are Guy's and St Thomas's, which includes Guy's Hospital, St Thomas Hospital, the Royal Brompton Hospital, as well as King's College Hospital NHS Foundation Trust and St George's University Hospitals. So Guy's and St Thomas NHS Foundation Trust and King's College Hospital, all the genomic services within these two trusts are managed by Synovis. And Synovis is a collaboration between a large diagnostic European company called SynLab and the NHS, and it's a partnership which has formed the company called Synovis. And Synovis is who employs us and who runs all the genomic services. St. George's is not within Genomics, is not within Synovis, but is part of the Southeast Genomic Laboratory Hub. So very quickly, the existing team structures, I'm just going to give you a quick overview. However, there is ongoing work because we want to keep developing our staff and increasing motivation, increasing job satisfaction for everyone. So we are constantly reviewing the roles and trying to create new roles for the different team and staff members. So currently within the technical team, which is the people usually working within the lab, we've got medical laboratory assistants, which tend to start at band 3 level in the agenda for change. If you're not aware of that, you can Google it, but that's where the pay scales are defined for staff that work within the NHS. Then the next step would be a genetic technologist, a senior genetic technologist, where you start having some more managerial responsibilities, and then a technical lab manager. And finally, you can go all the way to a service delivery manager, which is at a band 8 level as it stands. We also have the scientific staff, who are the staff who, following all the laboratory work that's done by the technical team and the production of data, plus some data analysis. The scientific team does the bulk of the scientific data analysis, but mainly the scientific data reporting. So construction reports, which then go back to the clinicians who have originally referred the patients to us. So these are the registered clinical scientists that we have, who, to become registered, need to do a training program before the registration, and that can be either a national training program, such as the SDP, which we'll talk about later on, or a pre-registration equivalence training program that we've got in place within our GLH, and Julia will be talking about that in the next section before the final section where Layla will be talking about the SDP. Next step is Deputy Operations Lead. In other genetics departments, they might be called Principal Clinical Scientists or have a different title, but here that's the title we give at the moment, and then we go all the way to the Operation Leads. So just highlighting this one point where when all of the time people reach within the technical team, the band 5 level, and then they have a choice of moving to more senior roles within the technical team on a band 6 level, or a lot of them decide to make the move towards the scientific training and can go into the SDP or to the pre-registration scientist equivalence training that we've got in-house. But as I said, we are working on more options and more routes for all our staff, and that includes the addition of apprenticeships within the career structures that we've got, and we're going to have a team in the next section talking to you about apprenticeships as well.
Thank you so much for inviting me along this afternoon. I'm actually really interested in the presentations around a career in the GMSA, so it's a sort of double-edged reason that I'm here today. So my name's Emma, and I work with colleagues within the Southeast Genomic Medicine Service Alliance as a patient and community voice representative. And I am there because in 2007, my lovely dad developed colorectal cancer. And during the pathology of his tumour, it was discovered that he had Lynch syndrome and a faulty PMS2 gene. So we as a family, back in late 2007, 2008, were encouraged to be referred to Guy's for some genetics counselling. And I've got a younger brother who's 5 years younger, and it was just before my 30th birthday, and my brother and I had very different perspectives about whether we should go along for genetics testing. My brother is incredibly fit, he's a marathon runner, and his view is, I'm healthy, why would I need to do that? Whereas for me, it wasn't around being healthy. I think something that was always ringing in my ear with my dad is everyone's well until they're not. and anything that we can do to personally have an understanding of a potential condition that may impact our life, that may mean that we have a low threshold referral rate if we go to a doctor with a symptom. It was really important. So I went along for the counselling at Guy's, which was a fantastic experience. It's quite strange, especially if you're really interested in ancestry and looking at your family tree, but it's very different when you're potentially looking at codes for particular conditions that family members have or might have had. And what came out was that my dad's mum had had bowel cancer, and although she passed away from a different condition, my dad was very much of the belief that if science had been at that point in the 70s and he had been eligible for regular surveillance and colonoscopies, he wouldn't have had colorectal cancer. That was his firm belief. So it was really important for me to respect what my dad was telling me and to think about what I could potentially do to safeguard myself and potentially any children that I might have. So the process was fantastic because it talked about what Lynch syndrome is and what support would be available through my local trust to help monitor me to ensure that I'm regularly surveilled for colorectal cancer. But working with the Genomic Medicine Service Alliance as a volunteer has really increased my awareness of how much has changed in the last 16 years in terms of that science. Because back in 2008, I received quite a scary letter to say, yes, you have this faulty gene. But also what it was saying was it was giving me a statistical list of I'm more likely to get this cancer, this cancer, this cancer, this cancer, this cancer, this cancer. And now with the strides that you're all making and colleagues within your department and the wider the genomic service nationally, it means that patients now who are coming to you, yes, they're getting a diagnosis, but also it means that the surveillance that they have and the data that they're having is far more nuanced. So now, if my DNA was taken now, it would look very different from the information that I was given nearly 20 years ago. So for me, the importance of the work that you're doing is huge. It's difficult because it's come out of a place with my lovely dad who was ill, and he felt a lot of guilt around that. But for knowing that I do have Lynch syndrome means that I can just be more aware, so that if potentially anything is there to suspect, it can be snipped away before it develops into cancer. So what you're doing is ensuring that patients like me or any other condition that you're working in researching or testing means that you're helping to people to live much longer, happier and healthier lives. And that is so, so important. And I think one of the things for us as volunteers is to support people like yourselves in putting out that message around what your role is and the importance of the role that you have, and also demystify it so people aren't suspicious or they aren't concerned, because it enables you to do your job to help us. So yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much. And if anyone has any specific questions about Lynch, do pop them into chat and I'll happily answer them. I hope that was okay, Nicholas.
Thank you so much, Emma. That is, thank you so much for taking the time and just sharing your experience, which it's very personal, but it's so important for us to hear, especially for all our staff that work already within genomics, because we don't often get to see, the patients that we work with or work for. So it's extremely important to get your insight. And again, thank you very much for taking the time for sharing this. And I hope it's very insightful for all the people attending as well. So the next step is a genomics laboratory tour. So Layla, do let me know if you can hear it.
This is the iconic area of London Bridge. It's one of the best places in the city for cafes, restaurants, pubs and seasonal markets. And it also happens to be where Guy's Hospital is based, which is the site of the main genomics laboratory in the southeast GLH. This is the entrance to the lab and the start of the samples journey. After a patient has their blood taken, a courier will drop it off at our specimen reception and it is booked into our system. This is where samples are organised into different departments and all identifiers are cross-checked to make sure that the right sample is linked to the right patient. After we put our lab kits on, it's time to go into the main area for extraction. Extracting DNA is usually the first step in the majority of genetic testing procedures. Because of the huge number of samples we receive every day, this is done through an automated machine which allows us to process samples much more quickly than doing it manually. Blood samples are carefully transferred into a special tray that fits in the machine. As the samples are transferred, it's really important to ensure no contamination occurs so all the wells are sealed. Then it's time to load the reagents and choose the correct settings on the machine. To successfully extract pure DNA from a sample, you need to first destroy the cell walls, which is done using an enzyme. This also breaks down any contaminating proteins present in the solution. Once the proteins are removed, positively charged magnetic beads are used to bind to the negatively charged DNA. The sample goes through a number of washes to remove everything except the DNA, which continues to stay bound to the beads. The final wash is done using an elution buffer. This separates the cleaned up DNA from the magnetic beads and leaves us with this tiny bit of liquid at the bottom, which theoretically should be pure DNA. But it's important to check the quality and amount of DNA, which is done in our next step. A tiny bit of each DNA sample is removed using a multi-channel pipette like this and transferred from the tubes to a plate with a quantifying buffer solution in each well. The plate is placed on a vortex to evenly distribute the DNA in the buffer, and a centrifuge is used to spin down the samples and remove any bubbles. Then the plate with all the DNA samples is put into this machine, which is used to show the quality of the DNA and also quantifies it. It can show us how much is in each microliter of sample by showing the average length of the fragments of DNA. If the DNA passes the minimum quality control check, it is then ready to be tested for genetic mutations. This is a high-throughput machine that prepares a large number of samples at once for sequencing, which is one of the most common types of genetic tests that we carry out. The results are then uploaded to a shared drive that scientists, such as myself, can access. This set of results show the nucleotide order of a patient's sample compared with the nucleotides of a control sample. Any differences are highlighted with a coloured peak like this light blue one. It is then my job to investigate this mutation and determine if I think it fits with the patient's history. I can then communicate this finding back to the referring clinician by writing a report with the mutation found and any clinical implications.
We are going to move on to our first member of staff, our first genetic technologist, which is Stephanie Gallardo. And then we're going to also have Ortega to join us after that.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Stephanie Gallardo, and I work as a genetic technologist at the Molecular Pathology Department in the King's College Hospital. Today, I will share about my personal career and my day-to-day as a GT. So my career journey started with a curiosity for biotechnology. So I decided to study engineering in biotechnological processes in Ecuador, and that provided me the opportunity to join different research laboratories, for example, the School of Medicine, where I started as an intern, and then I moved into a team leader position where we developed techniques using mitochondrial artificial transfer, and then we wrote some research articles. Then I moved into a different internship in the largest reference laboratory in Ecuador, which is SYNLAB, and I started as a volunteer research assistant, working in different departments, including microbiology, toxicology, and immunology, and then moving into a full-time position in the molecular biology department, where I perform different molecular techniques, including PCR, Sanger sequencing for cystic fibrosis, filial testing, different tests to analyze specific point mutations, and also developing in-house techniques, especially during the pandemic for the COVID-19, which was incredibly challenging as we started performing 90 samples per day, and then we moved into 900 samples, and then 9,000, and then 20,000 samples daily, which was challenging as we had to train more people. That also led us to get some funding to start a research project where we worked with neonates in Ecuador performing clinical exome sequencing. After that experience, I decided to expand my knowledge, and therefore I moved to the UK to study my master's in genomic medicine at the University of Southampton. During that period of time as well, I got interested in healthcare communications, and then I merged both of them, my research laboratory experience and my scientific writing skills, and that landed me into my position as a genetic technologist with Synovis 1 year ago. So as a GT in the molecular pathology department, we process samples for a wide range of genetic disorders focused around the red blood cell hematology. And this includes hemoglobinopathies, prenatal diagnosis for sickle cell disease, alpha and beta thalassemia, hemochromatosis, the RCGP panel. So as GTs, our job is very dynamic because we are involved in the whole process, starting from the very beginning when we book our samples, then extracting our nucleic acids, as we saw in the video, and then we quantitate the nucleic acids. Then for the mutation detection, we have different approaches. For example, for sickle cell disease, we have qPCR and we have RFLP. We also have Taqman tests and GAP PCR. We have Sanger sequencing, which is the primary method for the detection of the pathogenic variants for alpha thalassemia, beta thalassemia. We perform as well gamma sequencing, delta sequencing. Then we have our next generation sequencing service with our in-house red cell gene panel. And this supports a rapid detection of like different hemoglobin variants. So these variants, they need to be confirmed, not only for the NGS service, but for research purposes, for example, for the 100,000 Genomes project. And we complement this with the MLPA when we need to detect large deletions. So as GTs, we need to have different skills, and I could highlight time management, it's quite important. Then stocking for the reagents, troubleshooting for the equipment, as well as the maintenances, supporting with batch mix preparations, writing some validations for the experiments, as well as quality standard documents and risk assessments. And finally, I'd like to say that our job is quite valuable as we work closely with the clinical scientists to provide a definitive diagnosis of the causative mutations, supporting and informing, providing for the future management and counseling of our patients. Thank you very much.
So I'm here to talk about my career journey also, but just not as in depth. And my journey is a bit unique because I'm a biomedical scientist that's currently working in genetics. So I first started off as an MLA in blood sciences and cytology respectively, before moving on as a trainee biomedical scientist via the Accelerated Graduate Training Program. So this program was initially a ViaPath initiative that was taken over by Synovis. So the requirements for this scheme was I needed an accredited biomedical science degree. I needed to create a scientific poster and basic English and math skills. So now I'm currently working as a medical technical officer in DevDiz. I just wanted to elaborate on the accelerated training program. So for me to be part of this program, it required me going to the lab 3 days a week on rotation so that I could build evidence for my portfolio. And every Tuesday morning we had seminars that was mixed with the CBD sessions, as well as seminars about the modules that we had to do for our portfolio. So I found this course really helpful and good because I had a designated training officer. So usually with a portfolio inside a lab, it takes about 18 months to complete, whereas this took 9 months, hence the accelerated. And then they also gave me one-to-one feedback as well as help with the portfolio when it came to mock presentation at the end that you do. So how I ended up in this particular role was while I was waiting for my verification date that was in August, I applied for the staff bank role, which you will hear about later on. And so I started there from July to December and successfully completed my verification, but liked working inside genetics. I found that I had a lot to learn. my team was very supportive in terms of development and pushing me to learn more. Also, at a band 5 level, I've never seen as a BMS them do reporting, whereas at my stage we do some reporting and analysis. So I found that was very useful. And then also for BMS 1, which would have been my starting position, and MTO 2, which is where I currently am, it's still the same banding. So I wasn't losing out in that way, but I was gaining a lot of experience. So in terms of where my next step is after this point, I'm not too sure, which is great for why I'm here also, to find out what other options that is possible for someone like me that is a biomedical scientist inside a genetics environment. So I'm also watching this space, and hopefully Nick and the team will be able to give us more information about this. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ortega, and apologies for not clicking on the animations on time.
It's no problem.
Yes, and as you said, yeah, we are looking into more developments such as the digital specialist biomedical scientist diploma for genomics and molecular pathology that we want to have within genomics, and help create a pathway, a linking pathway between the biomedical scientists and the genomics departments. And obviously your career so far is a really good example, supportive of that pathway. So we are going to move on to Layla, who is one of our co-hosts and practice educator, and she's also a clinical scientist, and will give us an overview of the clinical scientist role.
My name is Layla. I'm a clinical scientist at the SE GLH. A bit of background to how I got to where I am. I did a undergraduate degree in genetics at the University of Leeds, which I got a 2-1 in. And as soon as I graduated, I had a huge career dilemma. I wasn't sure really what I wanted to do. I'm sure many of you are in a similar position to that. So I took a gap year, and I'd really recommend a gap year. People often think it's just something you take before uni, but after uni, once you graduate, I find that it can be a really valuable way to spend time figuring out what it is you want to do. So I considered a few things. Do I want to do a PhD, master's, consulting, teaching? And I actually went to my careers advisor at university, and she showed me this way that you can rank your career values in order of importance. So for me, I initially thought that I would be money driven, but actually once I actually sat down and wrote out the different values that I find important, it became quite low on my list. The things that I valued were intellectually stimulating, flexibility. Oh gosh, it's going off. Flexible, and having a positive impact. Those were my 3 top values, and that led me to the scientist training program. So a typical day as a scientist. I just want to note that we will have a section on the STP at the end, so I'm not going to focus on that in this section. That's just what I studied, but we will come back to that at the end. So a typical day, I usually start at 9 o'clock with emails and lists of priorities for the day, always with a coffee. At 9:30, data has been uploaded for a Fragile X genetics run. I analyze the data and find one to be quite unusual, which I flag with one of the senior scientists. At 10:30, I'm checking my emails again. There is a urgent prenatal, which is the sample from a fetus due to arrive, and I've been asked if I can help with the analysis. So I agree and make a note in my schedule. And at 11, I hear back from the senior scientist about the abnormal result and arrange a call on Teams. A bit of background to Fragile X. Female, people who are born female have got 2 X chromosomes. People who are born male have got 1 X chromosome. So essentially what you need to know to understand this section is that there are 2 peaks in a run for females, and there's 1 peak for males. So this is what I saw. Now that you have that background knowledge, I saw 1 peak and then I saw 2 peaks. This is a genetically male patient. Very unusual to see 2 peaks. You would only expect to see 1. So I included this to kind of show you that the role as a clinical scientist, it's not straightforward. There's often unusual results that you have to deal with, and you're trained to be able to have that understanding, that clinical and scientific understanding, to be able to problem solve and essentially be a bit of a Sherlock Holmes in the genetics field. So that was one of the challenges that I faced that day. We then have lunchtime, and we also have educational seminars on throughout the week. So there's one that we have on a weekly basis around, well, in this case, it was about a new type of genetic technology, but we cover all sorts of different topics during those seminars. 2:30, the prenatal sample has arrived and all hands are on deck to get the report out by EOD. That's end of day. So as a scientist, you also need to be able to prioritize your work. We have a lot of urgent samples that often come in, and you need to be able to figure out which ones take priority. In this case, a prenatal sample would always take priority over the others. And after finishing the analysis, I then go on to my routine cases. In this case, it's looking at patients with a predisposition to breast and ovarian cancer, and I write some reports that will then help them understand their risk of getting the condition better. And then it's home time, which yeah, try to finish at 5 as often as I can, and that's everything from me.
Fab. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today at our Genomics Open Day. So I've been asked to come and talk to you today about my story from following the pathway actually that Nick highlighted earlier as a Band 3 technician, right the way through now to a Band 8 service delivery manager. Okay, so my story started, I went to university and did a bachelor's degree in forensic science and neuroscience. When I decided to choose that course, I actually had the full intention of going into the police and working in the criminal section and doing forensic science as a day job. I did enjoy my course, but I've always had a personal interest in genetics and in medicine, and especially in things that make people who they are. And when I graduated that course, I actually decided that through the learning I'd done, I actually really enjoyed genetics, and I really actually wanted to pursue a bit more about healthcare. So I went and did a master's degree in prenatal genetics and fetal medicine at UCL. And as a key part of that course, I had to do a research project. Now, I was very fortunate at the time. I was given a research project at Great Ormond Street, which, as you know, has got a very good reputation. And I was working with them on a project in their genetics laboratories. That project was to try to understand whether or not it was possible to detect Huntington's disease in a fetus by testing mother's blood. It wasn't possible. And then as a result of working closely with that team, I was offered to stay on bank. And they said to me that, they sort of said, oh, well, would you like to come and work with us for a little bit? We've got a bit of maternity leave. Are you interested in continuing the work you've been doing? So I started there. And then, as somebody else already referred to, I joined up to a whole host of different hospital bank. And we obviously gave them my preference and said, I really want to work in genetics. I'm already starting to work in genetics. So I managed to then get a job at the Institute of Neurology, which is pretty much opposite Great Ormond Street. And I worked there as a Band 3 for a while before being offered a role at Oxford Labs as a Band 4. And then actually a bit later on, I was offered another contract back at Great Ormond Street as a Band 4. So I came back and worked for them for a little bit more. After a while of working there, I applied for the medical technical officer too, so same role as Ortega. And I actually worked in the same labs I work in now as a Band 5 in what was formerly called GSTS Pathology / Biopath. We're now Synovis. And while I was working here as a Band 5, I did my genetic technologist registration with the Academy of Healthcare Science. So really what this slide is also to talk to you about is the transition between a Band 3 and a Band 5. I would highly recommend at any point that you move around. I think it's really healthy to understand how different teams work and work at different sites. Everybody works differently. Different genetics labs have got different specialties that they do and different types of testing. So it's really good to expand your career. So as a Band 3, you tend to do duties such as specimen reception, DNA extraction, you do some QC checks, as Layla referred to in her video. As a Band 4, you move on to things like PCR, and I started to do some Sanger sequencing at the time, and then as a band 5 onto more complex testing, such as next generation sequencing, doing microarrays, MLPA, and as Atega mentioned earlier, as a band 5, a core part of your role is to do the wet work, so actually providing the tests, but it's also a key part of that is to do data analysis. So at the time, I was running the tests, and then I was looking at the results of those tests, and I started to do some report writing, as Layla showed in her video. And I was looking after, the way we worked at the time, I was kind of looking after the wet work for specific disease groups. So one of the ones I worked on at the time was spinal muscular atrophy. And then at all levels, really, you do a whole host of sort of general skills. So I was doing things like laboratory maintenance, so that might be cleaning or replenishing stock. I was doing more sort of equipment troubleshooting as a band 5 and training other colleagues. So kind of your skill set and your roles change and they grow as you progress up the bands. Next slide, please. Okay, so after a while, a bit like Layla, I sort of hit a point where I thought, well, what's next? And I was very ambitious, and I thought, well, I want to do a bit more. So I moved then over to a private laboratory in Cambridge, and the work that they were doing at the time was effectively that little bit beyond what the NHS was able to offer. So it was a private lab who were primarily concerned with trying to give cancer patients more time. And what we were doing was we were sequencing tumour samples from patients and trying to understand whether or not there was any targeted therapies or clinical trials that we could try to offer to them, which would be of benefit to them and hopefully prolong their life. So in this role, I started in a team of 8, and because it was such a small group, I was their lab and quality manager. So as part of this, I was doing everything from doing the wet work and the validation and verification of assays and equipment, so building on my skill set as a band 5. And then I was doing more things like managing equipment, facilities, waste streams, working with IT and purchasing. And then as a quality manager, I basically took our laboratory to official accreditation. So in the UK and abroad, that's called ISO 15189. And as part of that role, I was responsible for developing policies and processes and basically making sure the lab worked in a way that was in line with those requirements. And then, as we all know, 2020 came and it was a bit of a crazy year. Within a few days, we went from being a cancer laboratory to a COVID lab, quite literally in a matter of days. And so my role sort of expanded and I was involved in all kinds of different things about, sorry, I've got a tickly throat. Involved in all kinds of things about like how to set up a lab, what kind of testing were we going to do, what equipment did we need, how were we going to get that equipment, because you remember everybody in healthcare was after the same equipment, the same reagents, the same personal protective equipment. It was a bit of a mad time. And in that time, we also had to move to a new site. So I was involved strongly in that and had to plan how we were going to transition our services over. And our team grew from a team of 8 to about 280, I think, by the time I left 4 years later. So while I worked there, I did various courses. So things like laboratory management. I did work around UCAS guidelines. So I mean the ISO 15189 standards. And I did stuff around lean working, so that's how to make processes more efficient, and project management. So I did my Prince 2 qualification at the same time. And then not long after sort of, I guess, the end of, well, some of the end of COVID, I found this job here. So I actually am working, as I said, back in the labs that I used to work in at a much more junior level. So now I'm the service delivery manager for rare disease genomics. And effectively, my job now is to look after the day-to-day for all of the services. So making sure that our labs have got what they need to run. I do a lot of working with the support services, so facilities, finance, recruitment, procurement. I work with our operations lead, technical lab managers, sometimes also the technicians, depending on what the task is. And I have a key role to play in making sure that our laboratory can meet turnaround times. So making sure that patients are getting answers and results in the timeframes that they should be, making sure that we're providing the right types of testing, working on backlogs, and also working on service improvement projects. Unlike Layla's sort of general day-to-day role, where she has quite a predictable role throughout the day, my role, there is just no average day at all. I can have the best will in the world to have a whole series of meetings, and I might have bits of time carved out to do different projects, but actually something goes wrong somewhere, and if it's particularly critical, then it'll be my role to get involved and try to help sort that problem out. And I'm also involved as I'm line manager for a few key people in the labs as well. So our technical lab managers, for example, report into me. Next slide, please. And then, so I thought I'd leave you with a bit of advice, really. When I was in more junior roles, I actually wish I'd have had somebody kind of give me some advice as to how to sort of move forward in my career, expand my knowledge, etc. So I thought I'd leave you with some key thoughts that I had about how to get into genetics, but also to take that forward and progress through your career. So one of the key things I'd say is keep learning and enhancing your skill set. What I mean by this is take opportunities to do things like cross-training and help other teams out where you can. The more varied your CV is, the more likely you are to be able to move sideways or upwards, depending on what direction you want to move. Where you can, try to take on additional duties outside of what's expected of you. Example of this, when I was a band 5, I was obviously doing my day-to-day role in the laboratories, but I also took on a role in the training team where I was monitoring things like competency records for all of Genomics as part of a wider group. And I was also part of the staff engagement group where I was feeding comments back to more senior people in the business. Where you can, try and support others. So it might sound really obvious, but what I mean by this is, let's say it's 4 o'clock on a Friday and you finish at 5. Don't just sort of not do anything with that last hour. You know, if you're looking around and your colleagues look busy, or there's things that you can see piling up that you can help with, get involved. Go and speak to your team, go and speak to your line manager, do what you can to try and help others around you. And I always say this one's a big one, and actually something I still do to this day. I mean, you may think, oh, well, if you're a band 8, why are you worried about what other people are doing? Well, actually, I've learned a lot in the last 12 to 18 months by looking at people within the business as a whole, who do jobs that either work closely with me or jobs where I think they might sound quite interesting. Maybe that's something I might want to do in the future. So actually have a conversation with them, reach out, say to them, would you mind having a coffee with me and explaining how you got to where you are now? Or if you know something particularly interesting about them, perhaps just ask them for 5 minutes of their time and say, oh, you mentioned that you did X. Well, tell me about it. People love to talk, and you'll find that actually you'll get quite a good response from people who are quite happy to tell you about their own experiences. And then if it's relevant to your role, so I think Atega alluded to this for the BMS world, but also I've mentioned it in terms of genetic technologist, where you can work on a portfolio and try to become registered in your profession. And then last but not least, join a staff bank. I think Atega mentioned about her success story with this, and I've had a lot of success with this myself. So I'd recommend that if you are interested in working in genomics or indeed any other scientific discipline, if you sign up to the staff bank, you often get your foot in the door somewhere. I very much appreciate it's a chicken and egg scenario. You can't get a job without experience, and you can't get experience without a job. But if you join a staff bank, you tend to find that you can get your foot in the door somewhere, regardless of it being the discipline that you might want to go into in the future. And actually you can get that baseline experience, which will take you forward in your career. Oh, and just to say as well, Nick is about to, I think at some point today, share the link. So if you're interested in signing up for our staff bank at Synovis, then I think you'll be able to opt in for putting yourself forward for that. Am I right, Nick?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, there'll
Right.
be a link and a barcode in the end. Because so handing over to you, Julia. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick, and a very good afternoon to all of you. My name is Julia. I am a clinical scientist in genomics, and I'm also one of the practice educators here at the Southeast Genomic Laboratory Hub. I am absolutely delighted to introduce you to our next speakers, Michelle and Charlie, who head our apprenticeships team.
Wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. We have a session that we would like to run with you this afternoon to give you a little bit more insight into apprenticeships and into T-levels. We will have a section at the end for you to be able to ask any questions if you have any. There's myself, so I'm Head of Apprenticeships and Scientific Development here at Synovis, and presenting with me today is my colleague Charlie Fryer, who's our Apprenticeship Programme Coordinator. Really pleased to meet you. I hope that you've enjoyed the last hour or so far, and I'm sure that you'll find this session informative as well. So to give you a little bit of insight into our focus on growing our own within the organisation, you might just need to click one more time, Julia. There's a few more leaves that need to come up. So we're heavily focused as a team and as an organisation on grow our own initiatives. And these are some of our initiatives that we have in place within our organisation. So whether your aspiration is to be a support worker, whether your aspiration is to be a biomedical scientist, or your aspiration is to be a clinical scientist, genetic technologist, whichever of the routes, or also all of our back office kind of work functions, we are focused on growing our own. And so we run a scheme where we promote and support people through registration and specialist portfolios. We also support and have done for a number of years the scientific training program. I know you will have heard about this earlier in terms of the kind of national route to become a clinical scientist. We have a scientific learning and development fund, so something unique to Synovis. We've been running this for about 13 years now, and this really is to encourage and support our employees to take control of their own personal development journey. And so you get the opportunity on an annual basis when the window opens to apply for a scientific learning and development initiative that will be funded 75% by the organisation, and that typically has seen us see people develop through things like their MSCs, people going on to do their FRC paths, people going on to do PhDs, and a whole raft of different development opportunities, including people doing their top-up modules, whereby they have done a degree, perhaps in biomedical science, that is not accredited by the IBMS, and therefore they need to do top-up modules in order to be able to take the next route or the next step for them to be able to continue their scientific career. We also support our team members through the Higher Specialist Scientific Programme. So again, for those who have aspirations to be a consultant clinical scientist, it's a 5-year programme. Again, we receive some funding, as we do with the STP, from Health Education England, now known as NHS England, and we work really closely with them to be able to support our employees through that. We also have a graduate training programme, typically focused on those wanting to fast track into their biomedical sciences career. We are working with Nick, and we're looking at how we can mirror something similar for those wanting to progress into the clinical scientist route also. And last but not least, because we're going to be talking about this more specifically, is Synovis Academy, where this is our apprenticeship offering, and we have a number of apprenticeship partners that we work with, and we have a number of apprenticeship programs that we support in the scientific arena, but also in the non-scientific arena as well. We are very supportive and encouraging our existing workforce to go through the apprenticeship program. It's a core part of our employee development strategy under our HR strategy. And so we have people within the organisation that use apprenticeships to upskill. We also recruit to apprenticeship roles, and we're delighted to say that within genomics we are starting to progress with more and more people coming on through the apprenticeship route. Next slide, please, Julia. And I'll hand over to my colleague Charlie to give you a bit more of an insight into apprenticeships and T-levels. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, everybody. I'm going to give you a little brief run through of what an apprenticeship is and essentially how it works. So an apprenticeship is essentially a work-based training development program that combines both practical on-the-job experience along with theoretical skills and knowledge that you'll pick up through classroom learning. And apprenticeships offer an available wide range of industries at loads of different levels. It starts from entry level to more advanced apprenticeships. The employee gets allocated 20% off the job training time, which is a law that was put into practice to ensure that apprentices have the allocated time to do their studies alongside doing their 9-to-5 job and their work. This is typically mapped out between, I think the national minimum is 6 hours per week allocated study time, but it depends on the duration of the apprenticeship and the level that you are doing. Who can do an apprenticeship? So apprenticeships are open to everybody. Anyone can complete an apprenticeship. It doesn't matter what age or what background. It could be a school leaver, so somebody who is very early on in their career, and that could be an option that they've chosen to uptake instead of going on to university or to further education. It could be somebody who is already currently an employee or an existing employee that is looking to, as Michelle mentioned, upskill within their current role. Or somebody who is looking to sidestep and look for a career change as well. And it doesn't have to be, it's not open to anybody who's in full-time education. So it has to be somebody who is already within a workplace setting and within a job role. And then they can do the apprenticeship, or they are recruited externally as an apprentice into the business. Apprenticeship eligibility. So in order to be eligible for an apprenticeship, it is a national requirement within the UK to have either a grade 4, a C GCSE, or a level 2 in Maths and English, which is what we call functional skills. But this is not something to really necessarily be worried about, because most of our providers that we work with offer functional skills internally embedded into the programs. So if you haven't already got your level 2 or your level 1 Maths and English, this is something that the provider will work with you alongside completing your apprenticeship, and you can also get your level 2 equivalency in Maths and English. There is a 3-year right to remain in the UK, so it's a citizenship, I believe, Michelle. And you have to have at least 3 years of right to remain in the UK, and you have to be employed for the duration of your apprenticeship. So whether you're on a fixed term contract of 12 or 24 months, if your apprenticeship runs over that, then they are going to need to extend your contract. But if you're on a 12-month apprenticeship, so level 2 essentially, then your fixed term contract of 12 months will cover that time period. You must be employed and working for a minimum of 30 hours per week. Some of the benefits of an apprenticeship, it offers, as I mentioned before, real life practical hands-on skills and knowledge that you're picking up within the workplace, and you're around people who are within the specific field and sector that you are completing your apprenticeship within. Potential additional qualification, so whatever qualification you are looking to gain at the end of it, most of them qualifications are embedded into the frameworks and standards. There are no fees for college or university, and you're also earning a salary as you're learning. Potential employment on completion as well. Most businesses will offer you a permanent position within that role if it's applicable or if it's available. And also another thing to mention is networking as well. It's really good for networking and meeting people, rather than being in college or being within university and not having a chance to actually network and meet people within the field that you're looking to progress into anyway. There's loads of different types of apprenticeships that I've mentioned. Some of the ones that are more applicable to Synovis is all of the scientific apprenticeships that Michelle will be able to tell you a little bit more about probably if you have any questions. But there's a QR code there that you can scan, and it will take you straight to the apprenticeship government website where it lists all of the different types of apprenticeships that they have on offer or that are available. Level 2 healthcare science, GCSE, Maths and English isn't a requirement for that one in particular, but it is for all of the others. But there are loads of different types of apprenticeships that are non-scientific or non-specific. So there could be project management, procurement, supply chain and demand. There's finance apprenticeships. There's a really good website that if anyone is interested, I can leave in the chat, and it will take you to the website where it has a list of all of the different types of apprenticeships that are on there as well. So T-levels, so for a T-level is a 2-year program that also offers a mixture of classroom learning and on-the-job experience through a 45-day industry placement. So it's essentially like work experience or an internship in terms of it's usually typically within the first or second year of a study program within college or within university. It could be somebody who's very early on in their career. You will receive a certain amount of hours that you need to complete as part of your modules or your units with whatever course you are studying for you to be placed in a company or an organisation for a certain amount of hours throughout the year as a work placement. For T-level eligibility, it's pretty much similar for apprenticeships in the sense that you have to have the equivalency of Maths and English or a grade 4 or C GCSE level. Some of the benefits are it's the equivalency of 3 A levels. It's good for students with an interest in a particular field. Courses are developed with employers to meet their industry needs, and it better prepares students for work and further training. So somebody could do a T-level, and then after they've completed those 2 years or that placement, they could then go on to do an apprenticeship within the same company or same organisation. And it's good at showcasing yourself to potential employers, so networking again, and improving recruitment opportunities for yourself. Thank you. I'm going to hand back over to Michelle, who's going to speak about the different types of career pathways within Synovus.
Thank you, Charlie. So we are continuously reviewing our career pathways within Synovus as new opportunities and pathways open up. If I think about probably 4 or 5 years ago, before the apprenticeships had really taken shape and we had this avenue, we wouldn't have seen apprenticeships or T-levels or anything like that on our career pathway. But we're delighted to have new routes to be able to give people entry into our organisation and to be supporting our apprenticeships. So Charlie had mentioned some of these when she talked about some of the apprenticeships that we offer within Synovus. So we have the level 2 healthcare science assistant. It's a very kind of entry level role within the organisation, but there are plenty of opportunities to progress and go forward from there if your aspirations are to want to have a scientific career pathway with us. We then have the level 3 lab technician. Now we have a number of these within our organisation, and typically these are people who are supporting the laboratory and they're working to support the functionality of the different laboratories, and so the level 3 lab technician seems to be quite popular. There are 2 routes to be able to complete that one, so you can either come in already with your A levels and then you could go down that route to do the level 3 lab technician and work specifically towards creating a portfolio to be able to get that apprenticeship standard. If you don't already have your A levels, there is also an embedded BTEC in applied science as part of that apprenticeship as well. So you get the apprenticeship qualification and the BTEC in applied science, which is equivalent to 3 A levels. And then we have the level 4 healthcare science associate. So this is one that is particularly popular within the genomic space. Actually, we have found that this one is a better fit within genomics. So again, it's for a 2-year period, and the teams will be working really closely with our apprenticeship partner to be doing the study, but also they'll be getting exposure to the relevant experience to have the evidence to be able to complete that apprenticeship also. And then we have the T-levels, which Charlie just talked us through. We then have our associate practitioners, and again, there's varying opportunities to be able to progress within that space. We do have a level 6 healthcare science apprenticeship, which again gives you the opportunity to get a degree as well as being able to get your HCPC registration. And from that, you can go to places. You can continue and progress as a biomedical scientist because you'll get your HCPC registration. It puts you on that register. You'll then be entitled to go into a band 5 role, or you can also go on and have eligibility to be able to do the STP, which is the scientific training program, or potentially progress to the level 7 clinical science apprenticeship. And then there's onwards and continuing development opportunities beyond that. So we have a specific clinical scientist career pathway, which will allow you to continue progressing and see if you're wanting to specialize within one of your areas. Again, I spoke earlier about aspirations to be a consultant clinical scientist, and we have things like the HSST program or equivalence routes that you can take, or there's the biomedical scientist pathway. Again, if the aspirations are to want to go and do, become a consultant biomedical scientist or principal biomedical scientist, there are again opportunities to progress down that route, and the HSST program is open to biomedical scientists also. Just wanting to share with you a couple of case studies. I'll give you a moment just to read this. Looks like maybe the writing has dropped off at the end, but this is one of our colleagues, Hanan, who had decided to use an apprenticeship to solidify a career change. He had come into the organisation, he was working as an MLA. He decided that he wanted to continue his career as a biomedical scientist. So he went on, did the level 6 healthcare science practitioner apprenticeship, which is now changed to the healthcare science apprenticeship with our partners, Staffordshire University. It was a 4-year programme. He continued to get exposure with us, get his HCPC registration, and he's just about started his specialist portfolio this year. Our intention as an organisation is to train and retain people. So as much as obviously we want to train people, we also want to see people develop and progress within our organisation. So as people go on and do the level 6 healthcare science apprenticeship, or they go on to do one of our other routes to registration, then we put them in something that's called a talent pool, which means that they'll get all first refusal for all relevant posts within the organisation. As I said, because our focus is that we don't just want to train the people, we want to have an opportunity to retain them and see them to continue to progress their development pathway with us. And also just some examples of some recent graduates with us. So at the top left-hand side, this is a couple of our colleagues who were presenting a poster and that they created as part of their degree apprenticeship at our annual symposium. So they were presenting their poster, and then on the bottom pictures, we have some pictures of our recent graduates at Staffordshire University from 2023. And on the right-hand side, again, a couple more of our colleagues who had completed and whose photographs were included in the Staffordshire University brochure. Again, just highlighting the fantastic establishment of apprenticeships within our organisation. Charlie had shared some of the benefits in terms of the opportunity for people to work, earn a salary at the same time as being able to learn and progress their careers. And so we can't highlight enough how proud we are to be working with apprenticeships and to be opening the doors for people to have those opportunities to progress using that pathway. And then to my last slide, please, Julia. Just some useful contact details for you. I heard just before our section that we were talking about the staff bank, and I would encourage, just the same way that Keely and Julia and Nick were encouraging people to join the staff bank, that it's a really good route into our organisation. So even if you're not in the place now where you want to get a permanent position, although our website is on there obviously for our current jobs, there are opportunities full-time and part-time to be going through the staff bank. And if you want to find out any more about apprenticeships, please feel free to reach out to us at apprenticeships@synovis.co.uk. And that's everything that we wanted to share with you today. We'll open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was really amazing to see all the opportunities and how we grow our own staff. Do we have any raised hands or questions on the chat?
I have a question raised from one of the people in the chat. So they wanted to hear a bit more about the level 7 clinical science apprenticeship.
Okay, so the level 7 clinical the level 7 clinical scientist apprenticeship. We were working closely and getting feedback from the Trailblazer group. So the level 7 clinical science apprenticeship, it has been signed off, but there hasn't been a university as yet that has taken the healthcare science stream yet. So we are hopeful that going forward there'll be a university that will take that forward, that we'll be able to work with. So there are some of the other streams like audiology, for example, where they have got a defined university who is taking forward the delivery of that. There isn't a confirmed delivery vehicle for the signed off and approved apprenticeship for the level 7 apprenticeship at this stage, unfortunately. But continue to watch this space.
Thank you. Layla, any other questions?
That's the only one that I've got. I'm not sure if Nick.
Question, Michelle and Charlie, was whether the Synovus apprenticeship program provides sponsorship opportunities for international workers.
So typically not. There has been some recent legislative changes around visas and around sponsorship opportunities. And so actually, you know, continuously we're working with the HR teams and looking at seeing where the skills shortage in line with what the government kind of guidelines say to us. So typically we're unable to sponsor people below kind of the band 6 type posts. So this kind of sits outside our career pathway. So unfortunately at this stage, we aren't able to sponsor people through. Also, just going back to what Charlie had mentioned in terms of the criteria, you have to have a visa that will establish you for the period of the apprenticeship to be able to qualify for that apprenticeship funding.
Whether there's a fast track route to becoming a specialist scientist compared to completing the IBMS specialist portfolio through the traditional pathway.
So not necessarily a fast track. There are some practice educators that are working across the London network at the moment, and they're looking at the specialist portfolios. So the IBMS has just recently launched some combined specialist portfolios, and they're looking at creating some resources that will be able to support and assist those going through the specialist portfolio. So typically we give people around 2 years to be able to complete their specialist portfolio. However, we are continuously working on resources to be able to speed up that process, i.e. if somebody is already quite established and quite experienced, you know, the specialist portfolio is about gathering that evidence and, you know, showing that competence. So the more experience you've got, the quicker it will be for you to go through that process. But we do recognise that those people are in full-time jobs with operational responsibilities as well, and they will be given time to do that. But typically it's kind of taken between 18 months and 2 years. As we continue to create additional resources, I have no doubt that that will speed up the process, but there isn't like a fast track system that we've been able to generate for the registration portfolio available for the specialist portfolio. But I believe that as more resources are created through the Pathology Practice Educator Network or through our internal programs, which we look at kind of discipline per discipline, then there would be an opportunity for us to be able to complete it quicker. Happy to receive any queries at a later date from anyone if you've got any questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that very clear overview of the apprenticeships. Thanks. So next on our agenda for this afternoon is a presentation that I'm going to deliver on the support that we have for our pre-registration scientists here in our GLH. And after I do this, there will be a chance to meet 3 of our pre-registration scientists, and I will first explain what is a pre-registration scientist. So I was saying I was going to start with the definition of a pre-registration scientist within our GLH. So these are members of staff who have been employed at a band 6 level, and typically they might have a job title that is pre-registration scientist or healthcare scientist or support analyst. It varies depending on the hospital. So the duties of these members of staff are around analyzing data and interpreting the genomic data. And in some departments, they are also responsible for writing some of the genomic reports. So at the moment, we have around 40 members of staff who are pre-registration scientists and are working towards registration as a clinical scientist with the HCPC, that is the Health and Care Professions Council. So this career progression allows our pre-registration scientists to become Band 7 clinical scientists, and at that point they can analyze all types of data and write more complex reports. So we work towards supporting people so that we can have a better trained workforce that can deliver all the services for our patients. There are currently 2 routes that lead to HCPC registration. I'm not going to go into the detail of these routes, but if you are interested, Leila kindly will put on the chat the links to the websites, and you can read some information from these academies in terms of what it takes in terms of documentation to make the progression to become a registered clinical scientist. So what is the support that we give in our GLH? We have a program, a training program that typically lasts 3 years, but depending on the experience that people have, this can be a shorter time duration. Our pre-registration scientists have the opportunity to do different rotations and experience working in different services. For example, cytogenetics, hematology, solid tumors. And of course, the purpose is for us to develop competent scientists to run all of the services that we provide. So our GLH is composed of 4 different sites. The GUIS site that provides services for rare conditions, neurology and the respiratory specialties. The King's site is the specialist center for hematological disorders, also for brain tumors and liver conditions. At the Royal Brompton, we have the specialist services in cardiac and respiratory genetic disorders. And at St. George's, we have a dry lab, so there is no experimental work happening, but there is data analysis of genomic data for neurology, cancer, and whole genome sequencing. A typical training plan with different rotations might include getting experience in different gene panels, experiencing what it's like to do the duty scientist role, and a number of other things that will depend on the site and the team at which our pre-registration scientist is based. So the support that we give in terms of the training program that we provide is around supervision, some assessment opportunities toward in the form of case-based studies, for example. And if it is relevant, we might help our pre-registration scientists undertake service improvement or other type of research and development projects. Of course, some of our pre-registration scientists might come already with PhDs, and sometimes that is the case. So a research and development project might not be necessary, but we tailor the program to each individual to make sure that we meet their specific needs. So we have a tool called OneFile that we use to support our pre-registration scientists in monitoring their progress. Just an example of what OneFile looks like, and is essentially a folder system where people can store evidence of their training and reflections and other types of evidence that they will use to build their portfolio. And the portfolio that our pre-registration scientists submit for one of the different routes to get HCPC registration That portfolio is essentially a Word document that can be around 120 pages with a summary of all the experience, all their education, and examples of reports of case studies in which they were involved. We also support our pre-registration scientists by keeping them informed of things that are relevant to all of them. So as I said, we have 4 different sites, 4 different hospitals, and our pre-registration scientists are working across different teams and across different sites. So we have a newsletter where key information is deposited for our pre-registration scientists, and is also a way of keeping a network of support so that they can progress towards their goals. So that was the last slide of my presentation. I will take questions towards the end, and I will hand over to Sam, who is one of our pre-registration scientists based at Guy's.
So, hi, I'm Sam. I'm currently a pre-registration scientist here. So here at Guy's Synovis in DNA laboratory on molecular genetics. So I started out career in science. I got a BSc in biology from University of York, so quite a general degree, but I had like an interest in genetics there. So I took a lot of modules and that sort of thing. But as a sort of general biology degree, it wasn't super like medicine focused. So after that, I did a Masters of Research in Developmental Genetics at UCL. So at this point, I thought I was fairly sure I wanted to go into a research career, but I sort of was using an MRes as a way of like testing the waters a bit if I wanted to do a PhD. It's quite an expensive way of testing the waters. I'd say if you can make your mind up without doing that, I would recommend it. But it was really interesting. I did like a year-long research project, and it has given me a lot of lab and scientific skills that have been like helpful in my clinical career. So yeah, then I had a slightly meandering period of my career where I did a few different jobs. So I was sort of not quite sure if I wanted to do research. And around this time, I sort of started finding out about like the clinical scientist pathway. So this is just like not something that was mentioned to me in uni. So I did a few jobs. I was a lab technician in a school. Recommend that if you're a recent grad and want just like a sciencey job to tide you over. It was quite good. I was a barista for a bit. That didn't help me particularly. And then I was a medical receptionist in a GP surgery, which like I don't recommend being like the most hated profession in the UK, but it was a really good job in some ways, and like it did give me like a real like I did really want to work with patients after that, and as I was that sort of like confirmed for me that I did want to work in healthcare. So from that I was applying for medical laboratory assistant type jobs. That's band 3 in the NHS. So you can get those without a degree, but so I found going into one with a degree, I did find it a little bit restrictive because I was like, oh, I'm not allowed to set up PCRs, but I was doing loads of that on my master's. But it was a really great job. I really liked being like in the lab after a bit of a break, and I would really recommend it as a way of getting your foot in the door, which for me was the hardest part. It did take me a while to get this job, and hearing people talk about bank work, I think it is probably what I should have done. I think it would have helped me get this faster. And then from there, I applied internally for a Band 5 Medical Technical Officer 2 post, which we've been talking about. So there I went from sort of doing DNA extraction and exports and things like that as a laboratory assistant. I was instead running PCRs, doing sequencing, performing analysis, some like basic negative reporting, and that was a really good experience. So I think in most places, and it was the case for me, I had to have like an interview internally against external candidates as well. So it's not like a straightforward, they just promote you, but it is like a lot easier to get that sort of job once you've got your foot in the door with like a band 3 laboratory assistant type position. And then from my MTA2 position, I started applying for like pre-registration scientist type posts. So I was looking at this STP at this point, and it was something that I'd been considering since when I first started applying for MLA positions. But I think for me, and it might be true for other people, like after having been out of university for like 5 years at this point, the idea of going back to study felt quite difficult. And also just on a personal level, I was going to require a bit more moving around. It was going to be a bit more difficult for me. So I really liked my Tier 2 position, so I was like, I'm just going to keep applying for scientist posts, and it did take a bit of time, but I did get a few interviews. And like, I think a lot of people find you do have to stick at that, and especially if you're able to move around to different cities, it gives you more options. But I think that is a good option, and I'm now like sort of learning on the job, which suits me a lot. I think the SGP, you sort of get a bit more teaching, which also suits people. But yeah, now I'm pre-registration scientist. I've managed a few disease services, and it's really exciting doing that for, diseases that I was testing for in the lab. I'd really recommend it as a career path.
That was fascinating. Thank you for sharing that with us. So Mel is one of our pre-registration scientists based at King's College Hospital.
I'm Mel, and I'm a pre-registration clinical scientist in the molecular pathology lab at King's College Hospital. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my career path so far, and hopefully it'll interest some of you into pursuing a career in healthcare. So my career started a while back now. And when I was doing my A-levels and kind of choosing what course I wanted to do at university, I knew I enjoyed biology and science, but I wasn't really sure about what path to go down. So I chose quite a broad human biology degree at Loughborough University. And then in my final year of uni, I did a genetics lab-based dissertation or project where I was able to carry out my own experiments and kind of write up my own findings, which I really enjoyed. And this kind of gave me my first experience of working in a lab and what life might be like in a diagnostic lab. So I graduated. I really wanted to build on the knowledge and experience I kind of gained during university. And I became a Band 3 Senior Assistant Technical Officer, which is essentially an MLA or a medical laboratory assistant for the 100,000 Genomes Project. And this is a national project which you may have learned about in school or university. And it's a project that aims to sequence the genome of patients with rare diseases and cancer. So I quickly realized that I wanted to build on my genetic molecular lab techniques, and I became a permanent Band 3 Senior Assistant Technical Officer in the molecular pathology lab, where I was predominantly based in the lab, and then over several years I was able to work my way up to a Band 5 genetic technologist. So I think you've heard already kind of about the day in the life of a genetic technologist, but this role essentially meant that I was able to learn a lot about molecular lab techniques, from kind of basic PCR to more advanced techniques such as next generation sequencing. So as my role developed and I kind of gained more experience within the lab, I also really wanted to build on my knowledge and theory of the kind of fundamentals of genomics. So I completed an MSc in genomic medicine, which is an NHS-funded master's program aimed at providing healthcare professionals kind of with an understanding of how genomics can help patients' clinical care and treatment. And then that kind of leads me on to my current role as a pre-registration clinical scientist. So I've kind of given an overview of my career so far. And I think the experience I gained in the lab, as well as the theory I kind of gained during my undergraduate and postgraduate degrees, has allowed me to kind of succeed in my role as a pre-reg scientist. So Julia has talked you through this pathway already, so I won't go into too much detail. But over the next 3 years or so, I will be collating relevant pieces of evidence into a portfolio, and this portfolio will hopefully demonstrate my competency as a clinical scientist. So to kind of touch on Sam's point as well, I've worked in the molecular pathology department now for about 8 years or so. So yeah, I think it kind of highlights getting your foot in the door as maybe a Band 3 or getting some experience and then kind of working your way up. So yeah, that's kind of it. Hopefully you found this helpful, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
So one of the first questions that I've got, if someone is interested in the pre-registration Band 6 roles, what kind of title would that be advertised under?
Excellent question. So many laboratories, many genomic laboratory hubs do not advertise Band 6 pre-registration positions. They advertise clinical scientist positions for Band 7s. Because the idea is to get the member of staff who is already registered. So normally that's how they are advertised. Very exceptionally, things are advertised as Band 6. So the advice is, if you see a Band 7 position for a HCPC registered clinical scientist, but you are not registered, it's still worth applying, because if the laboratory does not fill the position with a qualified member of staff, they might consider taking on a band 6 and supporting them towards registration.
Another question that I've got a couple of questions actually around the pre-registration scientist route and some confusion as to where that's done in relation to the STP. So just to confirm that it's not something that's necessarily done before the NHS STP, as they lead to the same outcome. Next question, sorry, I'm just getting a few in. If you don't already have a master's qualification, is the only viable route to band 6/7 the STP?
Yes, but let me just backtrack a little bit. So it's not a prerequisite to have a master's qualification to get a band 6 position. However, these positions are competitive. So if you are applying with people that have more qualifications and experience, the chances are that those positions will go to those applicants, but it's not a prerequisite to have a master's. And then, yes, if you don't get a position as a pre-registration scientist, the only other route to become a band 7 is to try and get into the STP program. However, as Michelle explained, you might enter into a lower position that is not a band 6. So you might want to enter as a technologist position and then look into apprenticeships as another way of getting through the career path. So the entry points can be different, and that depends on your goals.
My name is Zoe Chatsi, and I am a clinical scientist, and I'm going to talk to you about my career journey so far from a medical laboratory assistant to a clinical scientist in cytogenetics. So I started by doing my Bachelor's of Science in Biological Sciences at Kingston University in London, and I graduated in 2015. I started my first role in the laboratory in 2017, working as an MLA in the stem cell transplantation laboratory at the Royal Marsden Hospital in London. This was a great first role, first introduction to the laboratory, because we were required to use the aseptic technique. We were working in a clean room, so there was a lot of health and safety involved. So a good introduction to the basics of the laboratory. But I was always interested in a career in genomics. So when there was an opportunity for a band 4 role in genomics at the same hospital, I applied for a band 4 associate practitioner in cancer cytogenetics. During this role, I was responsible for carrying out the cytogenetic techniques, such as fluorescent in situ hybridization setup, G-banded chromosome analysis, preparation of slides for G-banded chromosome analysis, and a technique called CD138 cell separation that we do for myeloma patients. And as I was getting confident in the role, when an opportunity for a band 5 role, MTO genetic technologist, came by, I decided to make an application. And after starting my role, my new responsibilities included, it was like a 50-50 split between the technical team and the scientific team. So while I was in the technical team, 50% of the time, I was responsible to train the team in all the techniques that I mentioned earlier. And for the rest of the time, I was working as a G-banded chromosome analyst, which was a slight shift of mindset of how we do things. I got to work with scientists. I was assigned a trainer, and I found that it really helped me grow in my experience and skills. And towards the end of this role, I decided to do a master's in genomic medicine at Imperial College London. I was fortunate enough to have it funded by Health Education England, which is a body that genomics resources and funding for NHS employees. And Synovis, the company I'm working for currently, also has an equivalent program. And I was then promoted to a Band 6 pre-registration clinical scientist, again in Cambridge, and I was working at Addenbrooke's Hospital. I continued to work as an analyst, fluorescent in situ hybridization and G-banded chromosome analysis analyst. And I was also working as a duty scientist, which required triaging samples, liaising with clinicians and liaising with other laboratories in order to make decisions on how to test the sample, and also was involved in writing reports. I then moved back to London. I started working for Synovis at King's Hospital as a pre-registration clinical scientist. And I was also working, I'm still working as a joint quality lead for the department. This was a great role because I found that Synovis provided loads of opportunities for me to develop as a scientist. This was the main time in 2022 up to 2024 that I worked on my portfolio. Through the scientist training help that I got to attend MDTs. I got to rotate for a short period of time to the molecular team and collate all the evidence that I needed. And I applied through the ACS Route 2 for registration. And in August 2024, I started working as a HCPC registered clinical scientist at Synovis in King's, and I'm still the joint quality lead. And I thought I would give you a brief overview of what might come next if you decide to take this career path. So what you might want to do next, if you want to progress further, is you might want to work on your skills, and as your experience grows, you might consider doing the FRC Part 1 exam. So the FRC path is a body that has several different specialisms, and you can decide to sit the exam of your specialism. It mostly involves self-directed studying, similar to the ACS Route 2 in a way that you have to study at your own time and organize your own learning. But there is a very helpful study group every year of clinical scientists that come together and they prepare together in order to have the best chance of passing the exam. And once you complete the FRC Part 1, you are looking to, if you want to apply for operations lead and principal clinical scientist roles. And if you wanted to take it even further, you may consider doing the FRC Part 2. And once you complete that part, then you can look for consultant clinical scientist roles. So as I mentioned, you can do it as a self-directed study, but there's also an alternative, which is to apply for the HSSC program, which is a 5-year program, as mentioned earlier. I know it's quite competitive. I don't know that much about it, but it's an equivalent. So by the end of that program, you would have passed the Part 1 and the Part 2, and you can work as a consultant clinical scientist. Yeah, thank you for listening. That's everything from me, and let me know if you have any questions.
I'm going to zip through this quite quickly, and then we have our STP trainees who also got some sections further on. So a quick run through. It's a 3-year training program that will equip you with all the knowledge and skills required to apply to work as a HCPC registered clinical scientist. So essentially the outcome is the same as what you would do as a pre-registration scientist. You get HCPC registration at the end of it. However, the STP, the main difference I find is the structure. It is way more structured. If you like structure, if you like having someone tell you this is what you have to do to get registered, then I would recommend the STP. However, if you want to be able to manage your sort of own training a bit more, then the pre-registration scientist route might be better. So it is quite different, and the main difference is the structure that you get, and also the mandatory masters that you need to do. Even if you have a master's, you still need to do the masters with the STP. So it's available in genomics, cancer genomics. Well, it's available in a lot of stuff, but these are the ones we're focusing on: genomics, cancer genomics, bioinformatics. We've also got a kind speaker from Genomic Counselling who'll be talking a bit later on as well. So we're going to focus on the ones that are within our department. Training is provided through a combination of work-based learning, so that'll be at your host department at whichever hospital that you are accepted at, as well as academic learning through the fully funded part-time masters, which at this moment in time is done in Manchester. So the training post is salaried at NHS Band 6. If you work and live in London, you also get an extra allowance of 20%. You're working full-time, 37.5 hours per week, and you get standard 27 days annual leave plus bank holidays. We provide 1 day of protected time per week for studying and doing work related to your masters. And at this point in our GLH, Fridays tends to be the day, but that can be negotiated. You'll also be allocated a training officer who will be your first point of call with any issues. They can help plan your training and get started. So the first year is a lot of rotation. So you go through a few different departments, whereas second and third year are when you really hone down in your specialist training, and you also do your master's project during that time as well. So again, I'm going to go through this quite quickly because you can find this information online. But genomics and bioinformatics have the same first year, where they do bioinformatics, cancer, genomics, and genomic counselling. Cancer genomics do bioinformatics and cancer as well, but they also do hematology and histopathology. In second year for genomics, you do your prenatal and pediatric modules. And then in third year, you do cancer and adult genomics modules. If you go down the bioinformatics route, you'll be doing diagnostic sequencing and software rotations in your second year. And then you go into applied stats, data science and quality, service delivery and development in your third year. Cancer genomics, don't be fooled by the fact there's only 2 rotations. These are ginormous rotations. So you do basically a whole year in solid cancers and a whole year in hematological malignancies cancers as well. So the process, I'm basing this on last year. They do often change, so do keep an eye out on the NHS STB website, but they usually open January, February time. And the first part of the application based on last year is a 1,000-word essay to write reflectively on how you meet the core person specification for an STP trainee. You can find the specification on the National School of Healthcare Science website. Following this, again, based on last year, there is the SJT, which is a situational judgment test. You'll have a couple of days to enroll on this test, and then once you enroll, you have a set amount of time to complete this. It consists of a series of hypothetical scenarios relevant to a healthcare setting, and you'll be asked to make judgments on the best course of action from appropriate to inappropriate. If you pass this test, you are longlisted. And at this stage, based on last year, they haven't yet looked at your application. So you get longlisted based on the SJT. If you get longlisted, you can then get shortlisted. So this is where they read through your application. And if it was successful, you're shortlisted and asked to select your location preferences. You are then offered an interview at a trust, which is not necessarily, may not be your first choice. But again, this is based on last year. I do think that they may change it this year. There is then a competitive interview over Microsoft Teams. And finally, once you've been longlisted, shortlisted and interviewed, you'll be very exhausted, but you will hopefully get an offer of a position. So following this, you'll receive onboarding instructions by your host department. And you usually start around September the following year. So what makes us different at the Southeast GLH? We have a dedicated education team, including an STP specialist who's yours truly, who will ensure that your training goes smoothly and organised. I think we are a very flexible team. We offer hybrid working with the option to work at least 2 to 3 days per week from home. We have a large number of trainees, so between 7 to 10 in each year, and plenty of opportunities to socialise and seek peer support if needed. We have a very open culture between trainees and trainers, including a Slack communication channel where issues can be easily discussed. And I do believe we work tirelessly to ensure our trainees are having the best possible experience and help them achieve all of their personal goals. So now we're going to move on to our current STP trainees. So again, like I mentioned, genomic counselling, bioinformatics and cancer genomics are the specialities that we offer. So I'm going to start off with Millicent. I believe this is your slide.
Okay, yeah, so my name's Millicent. I'm a first year STP in genomics, and I joined the STP straight after my undergraduate. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how my application process was while I was still at university and some of the experience that I have. So I did my undergraduate in biomedical genetics, and I really enjoyed that. One of the key aspects was that we had a module in medical genomics, and this was primarily taught by NHS staff up at the Newcastle Trust, which is where I did my degree. I really enjoyed this because it gave you a better understanding of how genomics is used in healthcare. I also wanted to get more experience in both rare diseases and cancer, so I did an internship over the summer at the Wellcome Trust, and I looked at rare mitochondrial disease, which I really enjoyed. I had a lot of lab work in that, but also a lot of research. And then for my dissertation, I looked at childhood acute lymphoblastic leukemia, and I felt that both of those gave me a really good understanding of how healthcare is investigating both rare disease and cancer. To develop more of my transferable skills, such as team working and adaptable communication, I started volunteering at a charity that supported young people with disabilities and learning difficulties. And I found that this was just a really powerful experience. I learned a lot, and it really helped when it came to writing my personal statement in those transferable skills about those kind of experiences that I had with challenging situations, really emotional situations, and bits like that. And then that aspect of this was that I was the welfare secretary for my sports club while I was at university. And that was a really fun role, yes, but it did also come with a lot of training that we started implemented. I had quite a bit of support while I was at university for my STP application. So I knew pretty much from second year that it was something that I wanted to look at doing. So my tutor was very aware of that, which was really helpful when it then came to writing my reference. But also he managed to get me in contact with the STP coordinator up in Newcastle, who was absolutely incredible. I had a really inspirational talk with her. She did genomics at STP, and it just helped really solidify to me that this is like an organization that I wanted to work in the healthcare sector. It was also something that I found really helpful was STP Tea Break Chats, which is a YouTube channel, and it's run by someone in the NHS, and I cannot remember their name. But they do like informal blogs basically with specialists in each department. So I watched ones on like, they had a chat with someone in genomics who was a clinical scientist, bioinformatics, and it was a really good situation to just kind of learn a little bit how these people do their day-to-day jobs. I also came to a couple of open days like this, and I looked at LinkedIn for the kind of experience that other STP trainees had, and that really helped when I then looked at my personal statement to work out what kind of experience I wanted to include. One of the things I would just say is take a lot of care in your personal statement. It does take time. It is about 1,000 words. Mine took me well over 2 weeks, and I sent it to my parents, my friends repeatedly to check for me because I wanted to be really happy with something I submitted. Similar with the situational judgment test, don't underestimate it. Do look at the practice questions. It'll give you a really good understanding of what kind of thing they're looking for and how for you to answer. And then my last kind of point would just be look after yourself during the process. It is long. It is about 6 months, and it can feel really tiring and quite anxiety-inducing at times. And alongside that, just have motivation and confidence in yourself. It is a competitive program, and a lot of people will tell you that, but you are qualified to do it, and it is possible to get in. So just be your biggest advocate and just try your best, I think I'd say is my advice. So thank you. Yeah, that's me.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Miss. It's a really important points that you touched on there. It is a long process. I do often get questions from people the day before the deadline that they're starting to write it, and I would really recommend against that because it does take a while to perfect it. We're now moving on to clinical bioinformatics. So we've got Rebecca here, who I'm going to hand over to.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca and I'm a first year bioinformatics trainee. And to tell you a little bit more about bioinformatics, it's a really exciting and emerging interdisciplinary science that combines computer science with genomic science. So our cancer genomics and genomics departments here are generating so much data, genetic sequencing data. So where bioinformatics comes in is we turn that data into actual information that can be reported out to patients to inform them about their genetic status. So these are two areas that hopefully you can demonstrate some experience in if you're thinking of applying for the bioinformatics specialism. But I have on the slide here it's sort of areas you want to think about touching on in your application. And you don't have to have any one certain experience. So if you want to ask the question, Rebecca, what's your background so I can know exactly how to apply and how to get in, that's not how you get in. You have to find a way to apply the experience that you do have to these different areas that is involved in being a clinical scientist. So I had pretty much one project during my previous master's degree where I worked with R coding, and that was it. It was nothing extensive or fabulous, but a lot of our other first-year trainees do have a lot of coding experience. So it's really where you can find the experience that's relevant and how you can put that into your application statement that matters. So, and in addition to the computer science and the molecular science, you also really want to be focusing on these areas that tend to be overlooked, I think, in your application statement, which is the clinical science aspect. That's all of your validations, quality control, competencies, writing SOPs and documentation. So the job you'll be doing is a lot different than a bioinformatician in a research lab, for example. And that's something you want to really get familiar with when you go to write your application statement, as well as those transferable and soft skills. It's super, super important. They're wanting you to put in actual examples of how you show leadership, how you manage your time, and how you could make judgments as a scientist. And then in the very center of this slide is the patients and the NHS values. So everything you focus on, you have to be able to bring that back to patient-centered care. That's the most important part of everything that we do as clinical scientists, and is really embedded in all those NHS values. So these are the things you want to be focusing on if you're thinking of applying. And I put the scientist training program core person specification on here, as well as the standards of proficiency for clinical scientists from HCPC. Those are two documents you really want to be reviewing as you're going into writing your application. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you.
Very, very helpful. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Absolutely. So we can get so caught up in what we offer that we forget the reason that we go into this in the first place. And it's always going to be about the patients. And also, I think it's really important to be touching on those soft skills because they're just underestimated. People think that if you are a whiz at science, then you're immediately going to be an excellent clinical scientist. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. You need to be able to have those team working skills and leadership skills and think about how you can bring your experience to show that you have those. Don't necessarily look at what other people have done because it may be slightly different. Moving on, I'm going to see if we have our genetic counselling STP.
Hi everyone, my name's Chloe. I'm a second year trainee genetic counsellor in the clinical genetics service at Guy's Hospital. And I guess what I do is probably quite different to what you've heard about today. So we see patients in clinic. I don't do any lab work or any analysis of results. So my background personally is that I have a BSc in biomedicine and a master's in genomic medicine. That's not essential by any means, but it's helpful to have. I've highlighted care experience because if you are applying for genetic counselling, that is one of the requirements. You won't get onto the STP without care experience. So people in my team have all different kinds of care experience. Mine personally, I volunteered on the online helpline for the eating disorder charity Beat, and I also facilitated online support groups with them. And slightly more niche, but I also worked while I was doing my master's as a vasectomy care assistant for a reproductive choices charity. There's all kinds of care experience you can do. It doesn't really matter specifically what it is, it's just how you can apply it to show that you have those skills that will be useful in genetic counselling. Previous roles that I did before getting onto the STP, I was a study manager for phase 1 clinical trials at the Institute of Cancer Research for a bit. And I've also highlighted that I worked as a genomic associate in my current team. So I actually got onto the STP through the in-service route. I didn't do the direct entry route that Layla spoke about. So I worked as a band 5 post in my department. I guess it's a bit like a genetic counselling assistant. And that helped me to get loads of really valuable experience. And in the end, my department nominated me for my post. So that is a route that you could consider. A typical week in my life as a genetic counsellor, because it probably looks quite different to what you've heard about. So As a second year trainee, I lead clinics myself once a week. I'm currently on cancer rotation, so I'm doing routine cancer clinics where I speak to patients about their family history. I draw pedigrees, I assess their eligibility for testing and counsel them about their options. If they want to have the test or not, it's a personal choice. And then I can receive their informed consent for testing and send off samples for our lab colleagues to interpret and analyse, as you've probably heard about. That comes with a lot of admin, which is probably the least favourite part of the job for anyone in genetic counselling. We all like speaking to patients, but we don't like doing the admin. So I have to do lots of clinic prep, post-clinic discussions with a registered genetic counsellor, because we get a lot of support when we're seeing our patients, and also making sure that I'm discussing cases in meetings. So we have to go to clinical meetings every Wednesday where we talk about all of our cases or anything that we're finding difficult or need more input in for clinical decisions. I will also have to write letters to my patients, which takes up a lot of time. We write very detailed letters to them all. And then other things I tend to do in a typical week. So every other week I will be on call for general and prenatal cases. So that involves any pregnant woman who is referred into our service to consider genetic testing. Whoever is on call for that day will triage the referral. So we'll call the woman, we'll talk to her about the family history, gather all of the necessary information, briefly touch on some of her options in pregnancy, and then book her for our rapid access clinic for that week. I will also try and observe at least one specialist clinic each week. So I'm doing my own routine clinics, but there's so many things that you can see as a genetic counsellor. So we have all kinds of specialist clinics like the Young Person's Klinefelter Clinic and various different cancer and general clinics. There's also ones that the consultants do, which can be really interesting because their job is quite different to ours. And then I also have my study day that Layla mentioned, and there's various projects that you get involved in as well as an STP, depending on what year you're in. So examples of ones that I'm doing at the minute, I organise and do all of the minutes for our metabolic MDT with the metabolic team, and I also arrange our psychosocial journal club and the genetic counselling taster day that we do. So top tips for genetic counselling applications, I would say the main point is that actually the person spec that everyone has mentioned is very tailored towards lab specialisms, doesn't really link very much to genetic counselling or clinical specialisms. So just make sure you are finding ways wherever you can to link it to that, really prioritise showing off your care experience and skills that will relate directly to genetic counselling, and deprioritise the ones that are more labby because they won't help you get on as a genetic counsellor. And just, I guess, to give a little promo to our genetic counselling taster day. So if you are interested in learning more about what we do as genetic counsellors, the routes into it, because it's not just the STP, and then more top tips from applications from one of our principal genetic counsellors, then drop me an email. My email address is on the slide and I can let you know more about it.
So we've got Evan and Lee. I'm gonna ask you to unmute. Evan's here on site, so I think we'll start with Evan, and then when you're ready, we can bring you in as well, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Perfect, thank you. Right, I'll hand over.
Hi everyone, I'm Evan. I'm a first year SCP and I'm doing cancer genomics. So I just wanted to give a little overview on what I was doing before the STP. So really, I just wanted to emphasize you don't actually need that much experience to get into STP. So I did my undergrad in biochemistry, and then I did a master's in genomic medicine. But outside of that, I didn't really have much clinical experience at all. So I did research projects for both my degrees, but then I did also like a week of work experience at a diagnostic lab where I was literally just shadowing for a week. And then I had some random extracurriculars, like I wrote about in my application, I wrote about how I was prefect back in school, how I like edited some articles for a magazine during my undergrad. So I think really just don't be put off by seeing people with loads and loads of clinical experience. It's more than possible to get onto STP as long as you're kind of able to show your transferable skills. And you kind of link everything back to the person specification and to the NHS values. I think that's really the most important thing. So we're going to hear from Lee next, who's an in-service STP. So I kind of just wanted to show what my application process was so we can see the difference. So Layla already kind of outlined it, where you submit your application, you do the SJT, and then other than that, really, you're just waiting until you hopefully choose your locations. So my experience so far on the SCP has been a really positive experience so far. So I think one of the biggest things I've learned is that proactivity is kind of a key skill. So for example, on rotations, where it's often up to kind of what time and where you'll be meeting the scientists you'll be shadowing, for example. And I also think organisation has been really important. So your work is kind of still very self-directed, where you're doing training activities and it's on your own schedule and it's up to you to make sure you don't fall behind. But I think overall it's been a really positive experience. I don't think I'd ever learned so much in such a short space of time. It's been really interesting to kind of be on my cancer genomics rotation and see kind of the whole workflow in the cancer genomics lab. So it's been a really positive experience so far. And I'll give it to Lee now.
Yeah, so my name's Lee. I am an in-service STP trainee, and like a lot of people, I've got quite a bit of experience in the lab. So if I go back to where my career initially first started in 2004, I think, 2004, was it 2004, I started working at the Forensic Science Service as a drugs analyst for 6 years, and I did a stint in firearms chemistry as well. And I had my undergraduate degree in biomedical science at that point. So that was my first love, forensic science. I think it was all the CSI hype at the time. Everybody wanted to go into forensics. So that was my first love. And the Forensic Science Service closed down in 2009, I think, or 2010. So I was made redundant for a few years. I went back and did my master's and started my career all over again as a MLA Band 2 at the Princess Alexandra Hospital in Harlow in cellular pathology. And basically I was helping the MLAs, assisting the biomedical scientists in the day-to-day running of the lab, changing the staining machine, getting requests from consultants to get slides cut, helping on the cut-up table, tidying up, the usual kind of MLA type role. And this was in Harlow, so I was doing the daily journey to Essex every day. And I went to a bank show at Vipath at the time to bring my CV in, and they were showcasing what they do there. And I remember there was someone talking about genetics. I thought I'd love to get into that, but you've got to be like super brainy to do that. So I went away, went back to my job, and I got a phone call from bank, and I was at Guy's for a year in the cancer genomics cyto lab, cytogenetics lab. I was there for a year, picked up I think all of the processes in the cyto lab, really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, they didn't have anything for me to do to continue. So I applied for a job at King's as same type of role, cyto band 4. I was there for another 3-4 years, enjoyed it again, and wanted to progress. So I went to Great Ormond Street as a band 5. And there did pretty much the same type of thing, cyto-based. So my experience is heavily cyto-based. Did the same type of thing, prenatal, postnatal harvest setup. Did quite a lot of arrays, actually. So that was my first stint in a touch of molecular. So that was quite nice. I was there for 5 years, showed interest in doing an internal STP, but the competition there was so high, it didn't really happen. It didn't happen. So I applied for a 6 back at Guy's at MTO3. Which I was successful with, working in the same team that I was working with so that was really nice, working with the team that I'd worked with before, a few new faces, but the processes stayed the same. It was just slipping back into what I'd known before. And I was there for about 2 years. And again, I was interested in doing the STP. So I sent an email to our deputy ops lead to ask if we would be getting funding for an STP, an internal STP, which she replied and said that they had got funding and they would be inviting all the 6s for interview. So fortunately, I was successful interview for the STP internal role, and I started that in September. And for me personally, it was the best route because my career base has been so heavily cyto-based. Molecular is relatively new to me. So a lot of the things I'm seeing is for the first time, despite being at Guy's for such a long time and other lab settings for a long time. And I've heard about procedures, NGS and PCR, and it's only now and training courses that I've done since being at Synovis that I really appreciate the techniques that they use here. So far, the STP has been intensive with our training competencies but I'm learning so much, and it's quite self-directed. Although we've got a lot of support, it's very self-directed, but you want no investment in what I'm doing, in the sense that I've had quite a lot of family members affected by cancer. So by doing the research that I'm doing now, and the reading and the background behind why we're doing what we're doing, I'm finding it really interesting. It just keeps me going. So we've got a really great team there. Everyone there's really friendly. My best bit of advice is to be proactive, just to ask questions, to ask if you can shadow, you can see things. Ask about funding at your setting if they have funding available for the STP. And just ask a lot of questions. Go for interviews, go for the Band 7 interviews. That was a bit of advice I got at Great Ormond Street, that they don't advertise 6s for the trainee roles. You have to apply for 7s, and if there aren't enough 7s that are already HCPC registered, they may take you on. So that's a bit of advice. And another bit of advice that I've had in my career is that if you want to go far, you have to be willing to move.
Great, thank you very much, Lee. That was really excellent. And yeah, we have we wanted this section to highlight the difference between direct entry STP and in-service entry STP, because we do get a lot of questions about that. And I think Evan and Lee really excellently showed the difference between applying for the two. So now we're going to move on to, okay, before we get to the questions, we have a feedback QR code. I am going to give you just a couple of minutes, if you could please.
Thank you, Layla. Yeah, if we give everyone literally 2 minutes until 5:02 to complete the feedback, and then we'll move on to the final Q&A session, plus share the barcodes for the expression of interest for any jobs with Synovis.
Self-study, but I don't have any university or formal research experience.
I do believe a few of the year ones this year don't have any formal experience and are self-taught. There are a lot of resources online to learn coding. Look into Rosalind is a big one, like Rosalind Franklin. It's beginner coding exercises geared towards bioinformatics. So if you could work on a few of those and bring that up in your application, I think it would be pretty strong.
Great, thank you for that, Rebecca. Are there any work experience opportunities, unpaid, but could also be any length, okay, so this person is in their second year of their undergraduate genetics degree, and they're looking at getting work experience. So we do actually host work experience days, so keep an eye out on the Southeast GLH website. Nick, do you have anything? I don't think we have any planned at the moment, but we're hoping to host an online work experience day again in 2025. Is that right?
Yeah, so we just started. We did 2 virtual ones during this year, and 1 in-person one. So we are aiming to have 2 or 3 a year. We will be advertising those on our website, but feel free to get in touch as well if you're interested in something like that.
Yep, Kira, feel free to drop an email to me as well, and I'll keep your name on record, and I'll get in touch once we do advertise those.
Also to just mention that we will also be at the Festival of Genomics, where it was going to be sort of like a work experience, very brief work experience session. So do feel free to come along. It is free for over 90% of people. So and it's a really good experience in genomics.
Yeah, I'd really recommend the Festival of Genomics. We'll be there on the first day, 29th of January in London. So if you can come along, do and come say hello. We'd love to meet as many of you as possible. What was the timeline of the STP application like in previous years when it opened to when the results came out? So
January to July?
January to July. It's a long process. Emotional ups and downs during that process, and a lot of waiting, I would say, probably a lot of waiting. So yeah, January to July. I've got a few questions on sponsorship and visas. I don't think you guys applied through the regular route, right? I don't think we have many answers on that. I think check with the National School of Healthcare Science website and email them, because they'll be able to give you more tailored answers to your specific scenario. How proficient in coding do you need to be for bioinformatics? I think, did you answer that one? That was more or less the same as the...
It does help. And although I'm saying, oh, a lot of people get in without it, there is a large portion of people who get in and they have already had, you know, lots of formal bioinformatics experience as well, but it can be a range.
Chloe, we have a specific question for you. I'm just going to check if you're still on the call. So I was wondering how Chloe found the bioinformatics module in the STP, how much she found it helped her interpretation of results, and does she know of any research genetic counselors?
To be honest, I found the bioinformatics quite challenging as someone from the clinical side, so I'm not very good at any kind of coding or anything like that. That's not my personal skill set. It was still interesting to find out what actually goes on, because we don't really see anything that happens in the lab or in the bioinformatics side. So it was interesting to get a perspective on it. I don't have to interpret any results myself, so we get given really comprehensive reports back from the lab saying exactly what the result is, and we just communicate that result to patients. I am familiar with some research genetic counsellors, yes, so I know there are jobs out there to do research genetic counselling. I think one of our principal genetic counsellors is actually currently out on I think the word is sabbatical, where she's doing a PhD in diversity and equality in relation to genetics. So there's lots of research opportunities out there if you're interested, but I don't know specifically about them myself just yet.
Great, thank you. We've got a question. Favorite and least favorite part of the job? You guys want to each give a quick...
I think my favorite, I'm just to be honest. So I think it's really nice to be able to come in every day and kind of learn something completely new. And especially when you're going on different rotations, you get a really good idea of like different teams and what they do like in a day in their life, basically, which has been really fun, I think. Least favorite, I think, obviously where things are self-directed, it can be quite difficult. So I think you have to really kind of keep on top of it, keep motivated to make sure you're coming in and you're doing like everything you need to do in a day, because it is entirely what you're doing, basically. So but I think once you kind of get in the swing of things, it's not so bad. So
yeah, I can really echo that. It's just so much opportunity for learning, and also I love that we're not just treated like undergraduate students. We really are treated like professionals and adults, and there's lots of opportunities to learn, and we're being invited to learn, but it's not the type of pressure where it's like, oh, you're gonna fail or something if you don't complete everything. Like, it's a very supportive environment, and there is pressure, but it's the good type of pressure, and I feel like it's a really good environment here. And what I dislike most about, I honestly can't even think of anything. I've loved my experience so far. So
question on SJT practice. Google SJT practice questions. You'll find them. They're not just for the STP. They have it for all sorts of specialities. So give those a go. And I think one final question, what is the difference between genetic and genomic career opportunities? They're the same thing. Genomics is looking at the whole genome. Genetics is looking at sort of individual genes. So genetics and genomics can sometimes be interchangeable.
Yeah, just say thank you very much to everyone for joining, and especially to all our speakers. Obviously, we can't do this without our speakers, and you know, your insight is invaluable for the audience. So thank you very much, and we shall see you soon, some of you. Thank you.